There was a paper that was published about 4 weeks ago, and it was sort of quite a contradictory paper relative to all of the other science. And what they found is that if you're short sleeping during the week, defined as, let's say, sort of 5.5, 5 hours, firstly, if you're a short sleeper, they found that you have a 65% increase of death at any moment in time, 65% increase in mortality risk, which is frightening. However, what they found was that if those people who were short sleepers during the week became longer sleepers at the weekend, it did decrease that mortality risk some. So that paper would advocate for you to do that sort of, sleeping late at the weekend. However, there are other data that demonstrate not for lifespan, but for your health span, that's a very bad idea. Because if you are doing that social jet lag, sort of sleeping late sort of in the weekends, and then you drag your body clock back on a Sunday night to try and go to bed early for the start of the week, it's torture. It's like, almost flying back and forth from, London halfway to sort of, New York and back. It's disastrous.
I did it for 20 years. It didn't work.
Yeah, I was going to say, and shift work, and we can come on to that too. But so there is this paper that sort of put out there this idea, but it's interesting. If you dig into that paper, you have to be a bit careful. Firstly, only about 4% of the people that they studied were actually in this sort of magic group of short sleeping during the week and then long sleep during the weekend. So it's a bit hard to tell whether it's a representative group. Secondly, though, let's just assume that they're a valid population, these short sleepers during the week, long sleepers during the weekend. If you then look into the paper, the data and the self-reported health, what you find is that people who do what I've just told you to do, which is go to bed at the same time and just get consistently good sleep, weekend and weekday, those people were in very good health. Those people who are short sleeping during the week, long sleeping at the weekend, they were twice as likely to be in very poor health. They were about 30% more likely to abuse alcohol, and they were about 40% more likely to be using sleeping pills, which I hope that we have the time to speak to as well, because they're potentially deathly. So right now, I just still don't think the evidence is sufficient to say that you should sleep in at the weekend. There just doesn't seem to be enough evidence to argue that you can sort of sleep back the debt that you've accumulated. Sleep is not like the bank in that way that you can't accumulate debt and then pay it off at the weekend, at least not in terms of health. For reducing your mortality risk by way of short sleep, it's possible, but you will still be in worse health as a consequence. We've known that data, if you're in that social jet lag, higher risk of obesity, diabetes, sort of BMI, cardiovascular outcomes, all of those are worse if you keep doing that flip-flopping shift between your sleep at weekends and weekdays.
Okay, I want to talk about sleeping pills, but before we do, you blatantly assert in this book that the less sleep you get, the less long you're going to live. And that's a strong statement. That's a wake-up call for a lot of people. If you're, doing these 6-hour night shifts, you're just going to live much, much shorter. What do people usually say when you tell them that? And maybe if that gets people's attention right now, what do you tell them to shoot for? What is this number of hours? And can you tell me more about that assertion?
Yeah, so firstly, the last part of the question, the place that people need to aim for is 7 to 9 hours of sleep routinely. Once you get below 7 hours of sleep, we can measure impairments in both the brain and the body. One of the problems with a lack of sleep, and I think it's part of the sleep problem out in society, is that your subjective sense of how well you're doing when you don't get enough sleep is a miserable predictor of objectively how well you're doing with insufficient sleep. So it's probably the idea of, a drunk driver at a bar. They've had a couple of pints, a couple of shots, they pick up their keys and they say, I'm off to drive home. Trust me, I'm fine. And your response is, I know that you think you're fine to drive, but objectively, I promise you, you're not. It's the same way with a lack of sleep. We don't know we're sleep deprived when we're sleep deprived.
Okay. So you're walking around thinking, I'm fine. Right. I got this. Give me some coffee. I'm going to be okay. Right. Look at my track record. Look at my CV. I always perform.
Right. And what you don't realize is how much better you could perform if you did sleep. So it's necessary, but it's not sufficient for optimal performance. And those data are in sleep and in the business and the workplace, and we can chat about that too. But to come back to your original point about sleep loss and mortality, that data is very strong from epidemiological studies now of millions of people. There is that simple truth: the shorter your sleep, the shorter your life. Short sleep does predict all-cause mortality.